Welcome to Liminal Radio. I'm Hatter.
And I'm Gray, and we're going to be talking about Lovecraft in this episode, specifically the Lovecraft bestiary Iceberg.
So, what we mean by that is there are creatures everywhere in the Lovecraft mythos, and we're going to be taking some of the ones that are maybe a little more important to the mythos, maybe a little better known, but we're going to go from the most well-known ones to the least well-known ones in an iceberg style list of sorts, and we're going to tell you a little bit about them.
And for those of you who may not be familiar with the Iceberg format, it's very popular. We're going to recap it real briefly, which we are doing ours with 3 levels. And yes, this is a custom iceberg. This is not just some crap we pulled off Reddit like some people do. We're not going to talk about who. We're not going to name any names, but this is one we created, but we are using the iceberg format, which is the tip of the iceberg, which is the ones you've definitely heard of. So we're having 3 levels. These are the ones you definitely know, have heard of, have been in 10,000 different medias. Then we have our C level of the iceberg, which are ones that you might be familiar with if you're a fan of Lovecraft. And then we have our Abyss level. Now, in the Abyss level, these are ones that you only probably have heard of if you are a giant fan of Lovecraft. Now, there is another level. There is the trench level. We're not really covering the very, very, very obscure, you've almost definitely never heard this unless you read that one story by Lovecraft while having a fever dream during your summer vacation. But we will cover that later, especially if there's interest. So let us know if you want to see more of a trench episode. And we may even do it as a special thing on a platform that may be coming soon.
Screw it. I don't know why he's being so secretive. We're starting a Patreon. We're going to have some special content there, including a lot of uncensored content and possibly some reactions to some media that you will not see on YouTube. Things we can't show you. Things we can't even talk about.
Okay, I was trying to be a little mysterious, but yes, Hatter is right. We are going to be doing a Patreon, which is going to be some more content, some deeper dives, even deeper than these, into some different stuff, including some stuff we can't talk about on YouTube, we can't put on Spotify, we can't put on TikTok, all of those stuff that, like, literally they throw you in jail if you even say the word. So, yeah, we're going to have a Patreon. It's not up yet. Stay tuned. It is coming. It's coming very soon, and there's going to be some amazing stuff on there that I think you guys are really going to be interested in. Like he said, some really kind of contentious, R-rated, knock your socks off, traumatize you, give you nightmares kind of stuff that we can't talk about here. We're going to be talking about there. We're very excited, so that is coming soon.
But on to the stuff we're talking about today. Tip of the iceberg. We all know, y'all know this is coming. Gray knew it was coming. I know it's coming. Who's the first character, creature we have to talk about when we talk about Lovecraft?
Well, it's definitely Cthulhu, no doubt. I feel like if people don't even know, if they know one character from Lovecraft, it's Cthulhu. If they don't even know who Lovecraft is, they know Cthulhu. I feel like Cthulhu is bigger than Lovecraft at this point, because I do honestly believe, just because it's been in so much media, that there are people who don't know, who would not know the name of H.P. Lovecraft if you said the name of H.P. Lovecraft, but they would know the name Cthulhu. So I feel like, of course, that's the tippy tip top of the iceberg. That one is up in the stratosphere. That is nowhere near the ocean.
Yeah, and I'm just going to rattle this off just to get it out of the way, because we're going to have an episode in the near future where we talk about Lovecraft and other media and his creatures. I just want to name a few things that Cthulhu has shown up in just as examples. He's been in the Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy. He's shown up in so many different games, including I don't know if it was the first new Doom game or it was Doom Eternal, but he kind of shows up in that. There are creatures that look like Cthulhu everywhere. The Mind Flayers in D&D are basically Cthulhu's star spawn. He is everywhere.
Absolutely. And stay tuned, because we are going to be discussing the prevalence of all these different creatures in media, and a bunch of them are going to be Cthulhu. He's going to be a lot of it. He won't be the only one. Don't worry. We will be talking about the lesser known ones, and they surprisingly get around. Even the ones further down in the iceberg do get around more than you would think. So it won't just be Cthulhu, but yeah, you can't really talk about Lovecraft and other media without it being a lot about Cthulhu.
Yeah, I think I just want to mention one of those things, just as a little teaser. Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, the prank call of Cthulhu was one of the best episodes there ever was. It's exactly what it sounds like. It's Cthulhu making prank calls, and he runs a whole office full of people who make prank calls on his behalf that cause horrible things to happen. That show's wonderful, and we want to do an episode on it, but we have to find a way for Gray to watch it first. So, moving on.
Well, and actually that's a great way to segue, because of course that's called the prank call of Cthulhu, because the first place we find Cthulhu is in the Lovecraft story Call of Cthulhu. Now, I do want to say, brief note on the name. Whenever I was a kid, I grew up saying Cthulhu because I never thought CH should say a K sound. I either thought it should be Cthulhu or Cthulhu. I still don't know why so many things that start with CH make a K sound. So anyway, it's Cthulhu is what a common usage, but I will say that I was actually doing a little bit of research for this podcast and found out that Lovecraft would disagree with all of that, and he said Cthulhu. Now, I think Cthulhu is the weirdest way to read that word, but it's important to keep in mind that no one can properly pronounce it because it's meant to represent a word that would induce madness and cannot be properly held in the human mind nor pronounced with the human mouth. So we're all just fucking guessing, so it's okay, but I just want to say I find it a word that I don't think anyone's pronunciation of it makes much sense.
And yeah, just to mention, just another concept that shows up throughout all of these creatures. Again, more detail on the concepts episode that we're going to be doing. But one major concept that shows up a lot is people think that when people see Cthulhu, they go insane because he's so scary, which is not the case. You go insane because he's just outside of our understanding of what reality is. The material he's made out of, the angles he shows, your brain can't process it. So either it breaks or, sometimes it doesn't, I guess. But you see what I'm saying.
Well, and we are going to, and just guys, if that sounds confusing to you, don't worry. We are going to be very soon doing an episode where we talk about the themes and weird little motivations and representations of these Lovecraft creatures. And when we do that, we are going to actually explain the mechanics of how and why Lovecraft creatures make you go insane. I have some excellent analogies for it. I think I can sum it up for everybody. I can really help people understand it. So if that's something that has always seemed weird to you and never quite made sense, don't worry. Stay tuned. We are going to explain it, but that's going to be in a different episode. We don't have time for that. We got to keep moving with the bestiary.
Okay, so last thing we want to bring up on Cthulhu. What does he do? What's his job, Gray?
So in that spirit, we need to talk about who Cthulhu is and what he does. Cthulhu is a priest of the Great Old Ones. We will be discussing a little bit of the cosmology of who the Great Old Ones are, the Elder Gods, the Elder Things, and all these different factions within Lovecraft of all these supernatural creepy creatures. But in his case, he is a priest of the Great Old Ones. He is specifically a child of Yog-Sothoth, who we will be getting to, who is like this elder god, outer creature kind of thing. And a lot of times when people discuss Cthulhu, they will refer to him as a Great Old One. But it is specified that Cthulhu sees the Great Old Ones but dimly. He is a much smaller interpretation of the Great Old Ones that can kind of fit into our reality. So he is a lot closer to material reality, to human experience. Out of a lot of the creatures we're going to discuss, not all, but a lot, he's probably one of the things we come closest to being unable to understand. He's actually fairly, not super low down, but he's fairly low down on the hierarchy, so that he's a lot closer to us being able to grasp. And of course, he is usually depicted like he was in Call of Cthulhu, as sitting in a great throne, sleeping and dreaming in the sunken city of Relia, which that's another word that it's really easy to pronounce 500 ways. I say Relia. Other people say it different ways. And again, these are all meant to be unpronounceable words, so they're all equally valid. And basically, he lies there dreaming, and if he ever wakes up, he will bring about the end of the world, ushering in the new era of the old ones.
Seems like that's a running theme throughout. If something wakes up, it's a really big problem. Is the Lovecraft universe just a big game of Don't Wake Daddy?
Oh my God, you're right, and now I can never unsee that. But yeah, there is a whole lot of, there are things that are sleeping. There are things that have stepped out to go get milk, if they ever show back up. Now it's starting to make me wonder, did Lovecraft have daddy trauma? I'm getting daddy issues from Lovecraft now that we mentioned that.
Well, I can tell you this, his father was a salesman, and one day he came into their house, passed out, and then died a few days later, so probably.
Oh, almost definitely. Actually, which bringing up Lovecraft and his issues, let's make just a quick aside. I don't want to spend too much time on this because everyone does this every time they mention Lovecraft. But yes, Lovecraft was racist. Yes, Lovecraft was very racist. No, it was not a product of his time kind of thing. He was considered racist by the people that he was friends with, including one of his friends who was a dear friend of his who wrote in his universe, actually wrote an entire article explaining how racism is bad. I personally headcanon, just so maybe Howard would read it. Of course, Howard, H.P. Lovecraft, would read it and maybe kind of understand, which of course he didn't. He was racist against everyone. He believed that as a white New Englander, he was the best type of person that exists. He was racist against people of all races, all religions. He was racist against Southern people. So pretty much he was racist against everybody. And yeah, that was probably largely a function of his mental illnesses. So we acknowledge that. Everyone knows that. We can kind of move on from that. But I do feel like you at least need to make a nod to it when you're discussing Lovecraft. But assume it to have been nodded, and we can kind of get on with discussing his thing. But I do think it deserves at least a nod.
Yeah, I just think it's important to mention that, nobody's okay with it. Nobody thinks it was okay. It's just important to remember we wouldn't have modern horror without him, and his whole family's extinct. So it's a death of the artist argument. And you know what? We're gonna move on because we'll be here all day with this one.
Absolutely. So back to Cthulhu himself, which I do think it's funny that Cthulhu is kind of bigger than Lovecraft, and I think that that's good in many ways. To tie into that and then move on. I think in many ways Lovecraft has largely been forgotten, other than people to kind of laugh at him as a comedic character, which he was tragic and comedic at the same time. I feel like by far the world he created is the legacy and is what we see. So Cthulhu being so big, so huge. Now, I do find the story itself of Cthulhu is so interesting to specifically call it Cthulhu, because it is a story that we see happen several times within Lovecraft's writing, and it's the same story every time. Guy goes to explore weird thing. Weird thing wakes up. Horror ensues. Guy wakes up later, half mad. No one believes his story, and everyone just thinks he's crazy. That is like 5 Lovecraft stories, probably more.
It's the cosmic version of Don't Wake Daddy.
Yep. And because it's that the Nameless City is like that. Dagon is like that. And there's just a whole lot of. Also, of course, as discussing Lovecraft, he was very afraid of the ocean and all things relating to the ocean. A lot of people jokingly like to say he was afraid of seafood, which wouldn't surprise me, which is why we have Cthulhu. And for anyone kind of unfamiliar with what Cthulhu looks like, he's meant to be sort of unknowable-ish, but we do get some pretty good descriptions of him, specifically in statues. So he's kind of has dragon-like wings, a huge body, multiple tentacles. Sometimes there's tentacles everywhere, sometimes mostly just on his face. A lot of people are picturing him with kind of the squid head type thing. Mostly we see the dragon wings, the hunched humanoid figure, and the face tentacles is usually the key Cthulhu features that you're going to see.
Yeah, pretty much. He's supposed to be unknowable and unimaginable, but we know what he was supposed to look like. But anyway, we've talked quite a bit about Cthulhu here, and we kind of have to. It's kind of a prerequisite. As we've already established, Cthulhu is bigger than Lovecraft at this point. He is more the star of the universe than Lovecraft is. But we have other creatures to get to, and I think next on the list is one that I would have put lower if not for a very specific reason. But Nyarlathotep, or how do you say it?
I say Nyarlathotep. And I do that for a very specific reason. It's because I like how it sounds better. If we pronounced it phonetically, Nyarlathotep is probably closer. I like Nyarlathotep better because it sounds more, because it's of course meant to be an Egyptian word. The guy is meant to have ties to Egypt, and it reminds me of the suffix hotep that we see in names from Egypt. So I think it sounds cooler, and I think it sounds more Egyptian, which it was intended to. So I don't know, but that's my preferred pronunciation. But again, with all of these, there's no right or wrong answer.
Yeah, pretty much. The reason I say that I would have put him lower if not for this is because he's pretty well known in another author's universe. And we mentioned this in the Stephen King episode. Nyarlathotep is also the Man in Black from the Stephen King universe. They are confirmed to be the same character. And that might be where most people know him from. He has many faces. He does things just to do them. He likes to cause trouble. He's my personal favorite.
Oh, absolutely. Randall Flagg is a fantastic interpretation of Nyarlathotep, however we'll say it. I'll probably use both words throughout this discussion. He's probably, I think, most people's favorite interpretation because Nyarlathotep himself is probably like a lesser-known character. Now, of course, he is from the poem, which is more prose, really, by the same name, Nyarlathotep, from Lovecraft himself. It was actually a poem, which was the first place where we see him. He is a child and messenger of Azathoth, who we'll get to Azathoth in a little bit. He is also sometimes called the Creeping Chaos, and generally appears as a normal human in Lovecraft. When we see him in Lovecraftian stuff, He looks like this swarthy guy that is out causing mischief and trouble. He's very interesting, very different than our interpret. Oh, I would say he's similar to Randall Flagg, just in that Randall Flagg has a little more personality, is a little more wild and funny, whereas Nyarlathotep is more kind of just smarmy, I guess would be a way I would put Nyarlathotep in Lovecraftian depictions.
I would say that he is very much a Loki type character. He has more personality. He's strangely more human than a lot of the great old ones or the outer gods, because he's a devil. He's somebody who wants to cause trouble just for the sake of it. He just wants to have fun. And oh god, I got to tell you, there are many interpretations of Nyarlathotep I really don't like. We'll get to that in other media, but no, he should never be an anime schoolgirl. I'm just going to say that outright.
I fully disagree. I am 100% here for the anime schoolgirl versions of Lovecraft, including I'm just going to mention that this exists. We will actually go into this in our episode where we talk about Lovecraft and other media, but there is a dating sim called Sucker for Love where all of the various different demonic, well, not demonic, but eldritch entities from Lovecraft are depicted as waifus. It's hilarious, and we will absolutely be talking about that, so stay tuned for that. But yes, Nyarlathotep does have a lot of fantastic interpretations and some highly questionable ones.
Yeah, Lovecraft dating sim just I think I just did a full body cringe, and I can't move.
So we have officially broken Hatter with the concept. That tells you right now you need to stay tuned for that episode, because it literally broke my co-host.
Yeah. But Nyarlathotep, what are some of his names? The God with 1,000 Faces, the Black Pharaoh. God, there are so many. One of them, in one form of media, I think he was referred to as the Bloated Woman, which is that's a unique one. But yeah, no, causes trouble, fits in wherever he wants to go, just does things for the sake of doing them. Do you have anything to add on him?
Well, actually, on the bunch of names, which don't get me wrong, I am a sucker for having a lot of titles. It's one of the reasons Odin is one of my favorite gods. You know, I have as many names as there are winds, as many titles as there are ways to die. It's why I love Odin. So I will give a brief list of some of his titles. The Crawling Chaos, as we mentioned, God of 1,000 Forms, Stalker Among the Stars, Black Pharaoh, as you mentioned, Faceless God, Soul and Messenger of the Other Gods. So I'm a big sucker for just giving people a lot of really cool titles for no fucking reason. So I adore Nyarlathotep for that. So yeah, fantastic character that just is in everything and probably should be in more things. And we will absolutely discuss more of his depictions when we get to that episode.
But on the note of him being the messenger to the outer gods, there are more outer gods. And one of the best known ones would be the one and all, the all-in-one, the Silver Key, the Gate and the Key. Many, many names. You know him. You love him. Yog-Sothoth.
And the interesting thing about Yog-Sothoth, who is kind of the outer god that we see most depicted, he's most often our antagonist in a lot of things. He is the parent of a lot of these other creatures. He factors heavily into a few other stories that we're going to mention later, but we'll get into that when we mention the character that is relevant, because those will be further down the iceberg. He's fairly well known. And the thing about Yog-Sothoth is, if you actually asked Lovecraft, because he was actually asked one time about what he thought about calling it the Cthulhu mythos, and he's like, well, I mean, I like calling it that. I probably would have called it Yog-Sothothian, because he felt Yog-Sothoth was the more central character than Cthulhu. So while he was cool with people liking Cthulhu, he thought Yog-Sothoth was more the central character of his mythology.
Yeah, Yog-Sothoth is a very interesting one. He's been depicted in a lot of different ways. He's the father of the Dunwich Horror. He's the father of Cthulhu, and another one we'll get to later on down the list. He's an interesting twist on an idea that shows up in religion a lot, which we will talk about in another episode when we talk about concepts and themes. But he's definitely, just to give a quick idea of what I'm saying, he is a flipping of the idea of omniscience, like this idea that a god, a creator, this thing that's everywhere, is watching you individually and cares about you. He knows what you're thinking. He just doesn't care. So he kind of flips that idea on its head.
Oh, absolutely. And Yog-Sothoth is really, really interesting in that he is that sort of depiction of the god that exists outside of the universe and cannot interact directly with it. As you said, he's omniscient and knows everything that's going on, but he also cannot interfere as directly as we see other beings like Nyarlathotep, like Cthulhu, like some other ones like Hastur that we'll discuss later. all these different ones that can kind of reach into the world and actually directly interfere. He's seen as too big, too alien. He is not, you're never going to physically interact with Yog-Sothoth. He is an outer creature. He is beyond our reality and our comprehension. And that's part of what makes him interesting and scary.
Yeah, and he's kind of similar to, and I'll just mention this real quick because, again, we're going to have a whole thing about him in other media. Also, Grim Adventures of Billy and Mandy, called Yog-Sothoth. They mispronounced it, but yeah, that's who it is. But yeah, he's kind of similar to the idea of Darkseid in the DC universe, where Darkseid appears as an avatar, and he will do this from time to time. The Darkseid we see the heroes fighting is not Darkseid. The actual Darkseid is bigger than the universe in itself, and he has to create avatars. If he enters it, he'll destroy everything. Now, Yog-Sothoth's a little different. They call him the one and all and the all-in-one. He is everything, and everything is him. He is in everything. He is the gate. He is the key. He is such a big concept because, again, he is not only in everything, but he is everything.
And of course, now I want to make sure as we're discussing these, we kind of talk about where they're from. And he first appears in The Curious Case of Charles Dexter Ward, which is a fantastic story. We will definitely be discussing that story when we're discussing more the actual individual characters and human people who are discussed in Lovecraft, which will be an upcoming episode. So we'll be talking about that book. So the fantastic book. He's also, of course, like super, super relevant in the Dunwich Horror because he is the father of the titular Dunwich Horror. So we see him in several different Lovecraft books. He's also mentioned in the Necronomicon, which, again, the Necronomicon is its own thing, and we'll definitely be talking about that some more. I do love that the Necronomicon is a book within the universe where people use it and misuse it. One of my favorite things about the Necronomicon, just as a quick aside, which we'll discuss more when we discuss the Necronomicon, is that it has the very famous quote, "That is not dead, which can eternal lie, for with strange eons even death may die." And in the world, it is acknowledged that that is not talking about Cthulhu, but that the cult of Cthulhu incorrectly attributes that quote to being about Cthulhu, when in reality, it's about the creatures in a book called The Nameless City. So I just love that it is being improperly used in world, and that's being recognized. Just love that. I thought that was a fun detail.
Indeed. Okay, so and we know Yog-Sothoth is in everything, and he is everything. But what about the being that created everything? Do we know? Sorry. Now, sometimes you think about creation. Humans, our backs don't work properly. Creation is not perfect, and that's because it was created by a blind idiot god.
And in Lovecraft, that is a god named Azathoth. And Azathoth is asleep and dreaming, and he is dreaming everything into creation. And if he should ever wake up, the dream ends and we all cease to exist. So that he is scary, not in that, oh, he is malevolent and oh, he wants to hurt you, or or even he has schemes that you are not a part of that will destroy. He's scary because he represents that we were all created by accident by an uncaring, unfeeling creator that may destroy us at any instant simply by waking up. He is more of an existential dread kind of character.
Yeah, well, let me be clear on what I said a moment ago. When I said blind idiot god, I was referring to Azathoth. We don't need the religious folks jumping in and, attacking me. But yes, his nickname is the blind idiot god because he is just that. He doesn't really have a mind. He doesn't have creative power. It's the scary thing about Azathoth is, like you said, it's the idea that this thing that is mindless, that's just a gibbering moron, created our entire universe, and it's within his dream. If he wakes up, we disappear. And it makes me wonder, though. It makes me wonder. You know what a Mandela effect is, right?
Yes.
So in the Lovecraft universe, what if Mandela effects are just him waking up and going back to sleep, and he's dreaming things slightly differently, but people have a faint memory of how it was before?
I absolutely love that. Just for the 5 people who don't know what a Mandela effect is, a Mandela effect is where some portion of the population remembers a historical event as happening one way, and another portion of the population remembers a historical event happening another way. It's named after Nelson Mandela, where some people remembered him dying at one stage of history, and another group of people remember him dying at a different stage. This is also famously the Bear-Steen Bears versus the Bear-Stain Bears, where people remember the name of the children's book being spelled differently. There's also whether or not the Monopoly Man has a monocle, things like that.
But yeah, I'm pretty sure that's because of Azathoth. He also has several flautists, flute players, for those of you who don't know that word, playing music around him to keep him asleep, because everybody is so desperate to keep this guy asleep. And I personally don't see the point, because he's going to go to sleep again and probably continue dreaming, and we probably won't even know the difference, right?
Well, now that is the key of existential terror. Because the idea being, if he was to go to sleep, I actually like the idea that the Mandela effects are where he rolled over in his sleep, didn't wake up, but went back, but just continued dreaming with a slight interruption is why things changed. It's when Azathoth rolls over. If he was to stop dreaming and start dreaming again, that would be the complete end of our world, beginning of a new world. We would no longer exist anymore. But that does bring up, if you, now, of course, it's important to mention when we're talking about this, Lovecraft was an atheist, and he was what is called a mechanicalist. We'll discuss this in more detail when we discuss the themes, which we will do in a later episode. However, his entire thing was there is nothing beyond this. The world is uncaring and mechanical, and so when you die, there is simply nothing, which is partially what is that fear of no afterlife, of when you die, it is simply oblivion and nothing, is kind of what's represented by the concept of Azathoth waking, is a complete end to all life, which I have always thought is not terribly scary, actually, because literally, if it ever happened, you would never know it happened. So, like, literally, you would be sitting here recording a podcast, and then nothing. There is nothing after that. You would never know anything bad ever happened. So I never found that particularly terrifying, but I do know a lot of people find the concept of oblivion like that very scary. So I think that's a personal philosophy kind of situation.
Yeah, no, I found that scary, so we're just going to move on to the next level. Next we have, actually, we're going to a new level here. We have sea level. These are things that you've probably heard of. Maybe you don't know much about it. And some people who are maybe new to the mythos maybe have not heard of that.
And these are going to be some interesting ones, because these are ones you probably at least have a frame of reference for. Again, depending on how big of a Lovecraft fan you are. Now, I do want to take just a moment to let everyone know, if you are watching this, hang on, pause. I got an alarm. Okay, restarting. Now, I do want to take a brief moment to let everyone know, if you are listening to this on a format where you can leave a comment, let us know in the comments. If not, let us know at our email. Hatter, want to give them our email address?
We can be reached at liminal.radio.podcast@gmail.com. That's liminal.radio.podcast@gmail.com. I'll put it in the description. If you have any suggestions, anything you want to hear about specifically, if you just want to say hi, feel free to send us one.
And specifically, I want to say, let us know how long it took you till we had mentioned a Lovecraft creature in the bestiary that you had not heard of. So were you missing anything in the tip of the iceberg section? Do we hit you now that we're in sea level, or did you go all the way to the abyss without ever learning anything new? Let us know how big a Lovecraft fan you are before we start on the sea level, which we'll do now.
Okay, so at sea level, appropriately, we have the creatures of Innsmouth. We have the deep ones, Dagon, Hydra. Cthulhu is technically part of their trinity, or their trilogy, or whatever you want to call it. But these are the ones that live off the coast of Innsmouth, the city of, you know what, I'm not even going to try to say that.
Well, and what's so interesting is the deep ones are fish people. You know, that's a pretty easy way to describe them. They're scary. They're fish people. In Innsmouth, the city, we have them interbreeding with humans to create that Innsmouth look, which is one of my favorite phrases. I want to describe, sometimes when I see someone who is particularly creepy, I want to describe them as having, they got that Innsmouth look. But so we have the people who have bred with the deep ones. The deep ones are these fish people who live underwater. Dagon is one of their gods, as you stated, which may just be a particularly huge deep one, or he may be an actual god. Mother Hydra, same thing, is one of the ones they worship, and the quote-unquote trinity, the three gods, quote-unquote, that they worship are Dagon, Mother Hydra, and Cthulhu, which it does make sense with the two being more directly related to them, and Cthulhu being kind of the third, much like in the Christian Trinity, how the Holy Ghost is kind of its own thing. We have Cthulhu kind of being his own thing, and sort of does show that they have a little bit of a connection to the old gods. So I find that really interesting that that's their sort of religious trinity that they have.
Yeah, they tend to refer to them, they'll say Mother Hydra, Father Dagon, and Great Cthulhu. Now, I learned a lot of this, and I did go back and double check what was canon and what wasn't, but I played this game. It was called Call of Cthulhu Dark Corners of the Earth. Are you familiar?
Familiar with it, haven't played it.
So it's basically, well, oddly enough, a lot of the story comes from the Shadow over Innsmouth, but the reason they called it Call of Cthulhu is A, it's part of the Chaosium whatever tabletop series Call of Cthulhu, and two, more recognizable, I would bet. You find yourself using ancient weaponry and modern weapons, well, modern at the time, to shoot deep ones and great old ones and stuff like that. There's a sanity system, one of the first ones, but yeah. There's a part where you have to kind of sneak out of the city because they're all after you. And you hear a guy walking around just muttering. He's saying, "Yeah, Dagon." Ia Hydra, Ia Cthulhu. I don't know why I did that accent. I should be a New England, but I can't do a New England accent. Anyway, yeah, we'll talk more about that again in other meetings.
Which I have so much, because there's also the game Sunken City, which has a whole thing with the Innsmouth look. Which guys, I just want you guys to know we are trying really hard to focus and keep on task for this, because there is so many other things. This is such a broad topic. We have so much to talk about. Is why there's going to be multiple episodes. So we're trying to focus. So in that spirit, we're going to go ahead and move on to the next thing in the sea level, which I think is another one that people do kind of know, at least in image, if not in word, which is the Shoggoths. Because Shoggoths, if you were to say, hey, describe a Lovecraftian monster, describe a Cthulhu kind of monster that isn't Cthulhu, they would probably describe a Shoggoth, which Shoggoths are big, amorphous blobs. They are your classic tentacle monster.
Yeah, they're actually adapted in D&D as the gibbering mouthers. So yeah, they've got gibbering mouths, speak different languages, eyeballs, tentacles. They're usually acidic, I think. I think their flesh is usually acidic. And they were made to be enslaved to the Elder Things, right?
Yeah, they were, well, there's some argument whether they created by the Elder Things or just enslaved by the Elder Things, but were created to be slaves. We actually first see them in Beyond the Mountains of Madness, which is basically where a dude goes to Antarctica and discovers that there have been evil eldritch entities building cities there for, millennia. And he sees these visions of these cities being built by the Shoggoths, which were enslaved to the Elder Things, which we will discuss later, and which were the dominant species, which were a type of alien that came to Earth. And the Shoggoths were their slaves. Now, at one point, the Shoggoths do rebel. So we do know that they're at least somewhat intelligent as far as intelligence goes. Intelligence is always treated very malleably in Lovecraft. So we know they're at least somewhat intelligent because we know they were intelligent enough to rebel against their slavery and actually, at least temporarily, overthrew the Elder Things. So we do know that they were at least smart enough for that, and they were enslaved and they didn't like it.
Yeah, I can't really blame them. It doesn't seem like something I would enjoy too much. Some people are into that, but I think that's a whole different discussion.
That is definitely a whole different discussion. Maybe for a whole nother podcast, but maybe not.
Save it for the Patreon. Yeah. Shoggoths, really cool creatures. There's about 1 million different ways to pronounce it. Oddly enough, in Dark Corners of the Earth, they call them Shaggoths. I'm not sure where that came from, but it's Lovecraft, where the languages are made up and the pronunciations don't matter.
Absolutely. And whenever we're discussing what a Shoggoth looks like, remember, it has as many orifices and tentacles and limbs as it needs. So it's got whatever it needs. Whatever orifice or limb is required for the situation, it's got one of those. Although I do think that certain Japanese media may have been unduly influenced by Shoggoths.
Yeah, and that's another thing for another podcast. Probably the same podcast we were talking about a moment ago. But moving on to the next one, we were just talking about something that's sort of a lower level creature, not even a great old one. We're going straight to the top and talking about another outer god, the King in Yellow, Hastur.
Absolutely. And now Hastur is right back. We're back up there to where Yog-Sothoth is. We are looking at incredibly powerful outer gods. He does tend to have more interaction with the physical world, I think, than Yog-Sothoth does. And of course, he is very famous, largely for having been talked about more in the greater Lovecraft universe than they talked about him in Lovecraft's original works, which is a great time to mention that the Lovecraft universe, even if we're not counting later authors, even during Lovecraft's time, a bunch of his friends wrote stories in his universe. So when we're talking about Lovecraft's universe, it is not limited to just stuff written by Lovecraft. Even in the canon of his time, there was other stuff included, and The King in Yellow is definitely in that heading.
Yeah, The King in Yellow was actually originally, well, I shouldn't say originally, it was written by August Derleth. August Derleth was one of the biggest writers outside of Lovecraft himself in his universe. I believe he also wrote The Lurker at the Threshold, which is something that tells us a lot more about Yog-Sothoth. And yeah, it's a big, expansive universe, but to talk a bit about Hastur, he's really, really evil. He's a bad guy. He has mortal enemies with Cthulhu, who is his half-brother. Remember we mentioned that Yog-Sothoth had another famous son? Well, there you go. Hastur, the King in Yellow.
And to just hint at what we will be discussing more in our In Other Media episode, where we discuss Lovecraft's influence on other media, in Stephen King, which you'll notice there's a lot of Stephen King that comes up here. because, of course, Stephen King was heavily influenced by Lovecraft. We see an interesting color shift where the King in Yellow becomes the Crimson King. So the Crimson King is very much King's interpretation of Lovecraft's The King in Yellow.
I'll make it even crazier. SCP Universe has the Hanged King's Tragedy, which is essentially just inserting the King in Yellow and his whole story and concept into the SCP universe. But they also have the Scarlet King, which is essentially the Crimson King. So he not only was adapted into different characters, but those characters that were adapted became adaptations of that character in another universe. I'm going to get a nosebleed if I keep on doing this, but yes, you see what I'm saying. Very ubiquitous character, despite being one of the ones that you might not have heard of.
Which is why we absolutely have to do a second episode about the influence of these creatures in Lovecraft's media outside of Lovecraft, just because they're freaking everywhere. So we will go ahead and move on from him, because that way Hatter doesn't die of a nosebleed, and we can move on, because we could talk about Hastur, the King in Yellow, for another hour.
So what we have next on the list is, I kind of debated with myself as to whether this should be in the Abyss or whether this should be in the Abyss or at sea level. We ended up coming to sea level with this. And just to clarify, folks, this isn't necessarily the order we're reading them in, isn't necessarily the order we're reading each tier in isn't necessarily like the one above it is less obscure. Just the tiers matter. So just focus on the tiers. But Future Hatter here, editing. I want to clarify what I meant by that, because I don't feel it was very clear. The order in which we read the individual creatures is not important. The tiers are what matters. Each tier is more obscure than the last, and these creatures are not necessarily ranked in order of obscurity within each tier. Sorry about that. The fungi from Yuggoth would be, arthropod-like creatures that are actually fungi from Yuggoth, which is Pluto. It's Pluto. They didn't know about Pluto when Lovecraft was around.
Which I would just like to say, as a millennial, I am still deeply traumatized by the fact that they decided Pluto was no longer a planet. Pluto will always be a planet in my heart. Ohana means family, and family means no one gets left behind or forgotten.
Yeah, take that, Neil deGrasse Tyson.
So, yes, as Hatter said, it is these arthropod fungus-like creatures, which are funguses, that are from a planet called Yuggoth, which is Pluto, which was a mysterious planet that they thought might exist because Pluto had been theorized to exist, but they hadn't proven it yet. And it's Pluto. It's a dark planet far away, so they got that right. They got mostly everything about it correct. And the interesting thing about them is they can fly through space. This is actually something we see a couple of times in Lovecraft, which is things having these stubby wings that allow them to fly through space. We see this in another creature, which will show up in the Abyss, but we'll hold on to that for just a moment. We'll hold that thought. So these creatures can fly through space, so they come to Earth like literally by just flying here. So which I think is also a very weird, interesting fact. And they show up in one of my favorite stories, or at least one of my favorite moments in a story, where they are basically terrorizing this guy and they are attacking his home, and he is fighting them off using a rifle and dogs. And like he is holding his house against a siege of these fungoid creatures, and at one point leaves someone a note, "Gone to town to get more dogs." So he and his pack of dogs are fighting off this alien invasion, which I just love that imagery.
Yeah, I mean, another interesting thought just on the flying through space thing and their physiology. It's important to remember that, I don't know if this was common belief at the time or just something that Lovecraft still believed, but they believed that space was comprised of a substance called ether, which again, we'll get more into that when we talk about the cosmology of the Lovecraft universe and stuff like that. So right now, we're just going to leave it there. Space was not a vacuum in Lovecraft's universe. It was filled with ether.
Which would explain why they had the stubby wings that could allow them to fly through it. Although it was implied that these stubby wings were metaphysical and magical. So they weren't necessarily flapping them, but I just find the idea that specifically you need stubby wings to fly through space is a very interesting factor of his universe, which, as Hatter said, we'll get into the details of why on that in a future episode.
So beyond fighting flying fungi from the planet Pluto, we move on to a creature that has many, many, many children, and we're going to be very careful about how we pronounce its name.
Yes, because it is the black goat of the woods, the goat with 1,000 young, and we're going to say Shub-Nogoroth. And now, I would not be so careful about how I said that name, and I'm not going to say it too many more times. I normally wouldn't mind saying that name because, of course, the word that it kind of sounds like is really just a Latin word for black. because it's the Black Goat of the Woods. However, if you know Lovecraft and you know what he named his cat, which we're not going to tell you, you'd have to go look it up. But if you know what he named his cat, you know why we're a little bit hesitant to say any word related to Lovecraft that sounds like that word. So that's just the name. That is the name. We will from henceforth be calling it the Black Goat of the Woods. Just that's who we're talking about. Just know.
So this creature kind of looks like a freaky tree, right? How would you describe it?
The thing is, it's been depicted a little bit differently. Kind of a tree, kind of a mass, kind of a creature, kind of sort of goat-like features. But the biggest thing about it is less what it looks like, which it has sort of these interesting verdant features. It's very, actually, I know the perfect way to describe this. If you wanted another media's version of the Black Goat of the Woods, from Warhammer, Warhammer in general, Warhammer 40k, and its Warhammer Fantasy, the endlessly fecund.
Fecund means fertile and putting out a lot of offspring, just so y'all know.
Creature that gives birth to all these different creatures and diseases and things. It's got very Grandpa Nurgle energy. So if you want kind of an imagery, we're in that ballpark.
Yeah, I'm just looking up pictures of it right now as we speak, and yeah. I mean, it's like any other Lovecraft creature. You don't know. You just don't know. It's going to look like what it needs to look like to be what it is. But yeah, I can't say a terrible lot about this particular creature just because I'll be honest, I just don't know a lot about it. I just know it has thousands of kids. I know that there is a heavy metal band out there I love called Goat Whore. And when I first heard their name, I thought, oh, it's a reference to Lovecraft. Then I read an interview with the singer who said it was just a way he insulted somebody once. So that was a little disappointing.
And of course, the Black Goat of the Woods is originally mentioned in The Whisperer in Darkness. Now, it is worth mentioning, like we're talking about why, like, Hatter's not being as familiar with it, and we're kind of discussing what it looks like. One of the reasons for that is in Lovecraft itself, in Lovecraft himself's writing, the creature, the Black Goat of the Woods, is not actually described. We don't ever physically see it as the reader. It's mostly mentioned as people are worshiping it. It's mentioned in incantations. We see the creatures it spawns, but we don't really physically see the Black Goat itself. So when we're talking about what it looks like, it's more vibes, which is how a lot of Lovecraftian creatures are.
Yeah, I personally think that's a little more interesting because the idea is it's a fertility god, very clearly, and that could take on some strange forms in a dark universe like Lovecraft's. But yeah, not much else to say about that. Did you have anything more to add about her?
Just that is one of my favorite things about Lovecraft is dark reflections. Because, we have the Black Goat of the Woods is a dark reflection of a fertility god. We have Cthulhu as a dark reflection of a harbinger, of kind of a second coming kind of situation, and is a dark reflection of that. We have Azathoth as a dark reflection of an omnipotent, omniscient creator god, but it is a dark reflection of that. So I love taking things that are common in other mythologies, other religions, other just philosophies and concepts, and Lovecraft showing the dark, scary reflection of that, I think is one of the reasons why his stuff is so compelling and is still so popular and influential, is the concept of dark reflections.
Yeah, and that we're going to talk a lot about that in the themes episode. I wrote an entire report in my college literature class about this, like an entire 10-page essay on dark reflections, but we'll get to that in that episode. Next on the list, we have something that is kind of a dark reflection itself, the Dunwich Horror.
Oh, and the Dunwich Horror is a fantastic book. It is a really interesting idea where essentially what we're discussing is that there was a woman who performed a ritual and had relations with Yog-Sothoth. And as a result of that, at the beginning of the book, you're aware that she had a son. And the son's name is Wilbur, and he's very weird. It's implied that he has tentacles, he's evil, and he ends up dying when he tries to steal a copy of the Necronomicon from Arkham University. He is killed by their guard dog, because as we mentioned dogs a little bit, and one thing that's worth noting is in Lovecraft, dogs and cats are both foes of evil. We actually see they have a better than normal ability to fight eldritch entities. Dogs and cats have power. We see that in a bunch of different stories. And in this case, Wilbur, who was mostly human looking but with some inhuman features, gets killed by a guard dog. At this point, his mother has already died. He, we find out, had been taking care of his brother, who is no longer being taken care of. And his brother took after their father less than his mother. So his brother is this giant, scary tentacle monster that kind of has a human face. And that giant, scary tentacle monster that looks more like Yog-Sothoth than his mother is the Dunwich Horror of the title, which is then only barely stopped from a rampage where it goes on killing people and all that because it was no longer being fed cattle being stolen by its brother and mother.
Yeah, that's where we come to the dark reflection once again. It's, pretty obvious. Immaculate conception, demigod, babies. Yeah, that's Lovecraft's take.
Which is awesome. And I just have always thought the line talking about how he had a brother, but his brother took more after his father, and just leaving that as just this implied an implication of what that means Yog-Sothoth must be like because this creature took more after him. I just always found that so cool and so elegant.
Yeah, I definitely agree. It's an interesting way instead of just outright describing what Yog-Sothoth is, we get this idea through his kid, through Sonny Boy or daughter. Was it a daughter or a son?
Oh, I think it was brother. I think they specifically referred to him as Wilbur's brother.
Yeah, Yog-Sothoth Jr. But on that note, speaking of dark reflections, we're going to move, I think, to the darkest part of the iceberg. Are we all ready for that?
Which I am so excited for this. This is the Abyss. This is the one where I want to know, and everyone, make sure you let us know whether or not you've heard of these before. So this is the one where we're probably going to be giving you some new information.
So in the Abyss, we have the things that maybe some people have heard of. If you're a super fan, you know about it, but you still might not know much. Most of the people who know names like Cthulhu and Yog-Sothoth will not have heard of a lot of these things. Now, again, remember that some of these are from other authors, but it's still within the Lovecraft universe. On that note, one of the first things we have is a creation of Frank Belknap Long, The Hounds of Tindalos.
And the Hounds of Tindalos are very interesting because, in my mind, they are based on the concept that math is scary. Because the entire thing is that there is another universe beyond this one. We exist in curved time-space. They exist in angular time-space. And they are a type of creature that once they are aware of you, once you have looked into angular time-space, they are these creatures. They are called the Hounds of Tindalos. They are not especially dog-like. We know they have a proboscis, so in that way they may be insect-like, but we never really find out what they're like. We know that they have this blue ichor. And the big thing is when they start hunting you, they hunt you through time. So they hunt you before you ever become aware of them because they start hunting you backwards through time, forwards through time, and with no regard to time. They're also sometimes discussed as hunting time travelers, which I find interesting, although I did not find specifically a book discussing that. So I find it interesting, but that's unsubstantiated, but still cool. And the big thing is they can creep into our world through any angle that is greater than 120 degrees, which is why I am just saying that this was a guy who was terrified of math.
Yeah, that's kind of their whole angle. But yeah, they're always one of my favorite creatures. One of the things that, and this, it's not really them, it's something that bugs me about, you're familiar with the band Metallica, right?
Yes.
So Metallica had several songs about Lovecraft. First they had the Call of Cthulhu. I'll give you 3 guesses what that was about.
I'm betting I could get it in one.
Probably. Then they had another song called The Thing That Should Not Be, and that was also about Cthulhu. However, the first Call of Cthulhu song was an instrumental, so doing one with lyrics was a little bit different. And a side note, at one point they refer to Cthulhu as the Crawling Chaos. That always bugged me, but that's okay. They did their next Lovecraft song decades later. They did a song about the Hounds of Tindalos called All Nightmare Long, which they did a music video that just involved zombies and stuff. I wish they had really used the source material, but whatever. And then finally they did a song called Dream No More, which is about Cthulhu again. It's like, come on, you were expanding, expand more, but I spent too long on this. Moving on to the next entry on the list, we have the Night Gaunts.
Which the Night Gaunts are simple. The Night Gaunts are great. They are these very classic flying devil-looking creatures in black. So they're very cool. The most interesting thing about them, they are these creatures that haunt the night and are very ominous. The thing I find so cool about them is that Lovecraft actually had a dream about them. He was actually writing about them from a dream. And what he talked about what was so scary about them to him is how unemotional and uncaring they were and how they just pursued you and basically gave you the stink eye, but didn't exactly do anything in kind of his original dream. And I just sort of like that, just this uncaring, judging creature, Which I just want to make. I just wonder, is that cats? I mean, was he just thinking of cats when he described this?
Well, they're giving you the stink eye because, especially in modern day, they know what people are dreaming about. And some of the people that are dreaming about these things see them and have the same thoughts, and that's why we don't see night gods.
Now, I will say, I do love the representation of the night gaunts in a book by Neil Gaiman. Have you ever read or heard of the book Graveyard Book by Neil Gaiman?
No, I don't know a terrible lot of his work, I'll be honest.
Which you want to talk about authors that we have to kind of put asterisks by these days for questionable behavior. He's on that list now, unfortunately. But his stuff is very good. And there is a book called The Graveyard Book, which is basically a retelling of the Jungle Book. But instead of the child being left in the jungle, he's left in a graveyard raised by ghosts. And it tells a lot of the adventures of Mowgli, but with werewolves and vampires. His Bagheera is a vampire. His Baloo is a werewolf. Named Miss Lupescu, by the way, who is one of the best interpretations of a werewolf ever. But I don't want to get sidetracked, but just to say that he has an adventure where he is kidnapped by ghouls, which we will get to in just a second. That's also on the Abyss, which are a Lovecraftian creature. And he is rescued by a night gaunt. So I do just love that these are two Lovecraftian creatures that show up in that media, which again, we'll do more on that in length later.
Oh, for sure. We're going to talk about Lovecraft and other media, but for now, we'll stick with Lovecraft and mainly Lovecraft media. The next one on our list here is Elder Things, which we briefly talked about earlier.
And the Elder Things are an alien race that came to Earth long, long ago. They were in opposition to like the outer gods. They were in opposition to the fungi from Yogoth. There's the Migo also is another name for the fungi. And they were in opposition to them. So they were an alien faction. Actually, at one point, I think there's even a discussion of them being in opposition to the Deep Ones. But they're an alien race. They are sometimes described as being like this big, huge tubular creature with tentacles and like a starfish on each end. So they're very interesting, just sort of weird alien critter that the main thing they are known for is building these non-Euclidean geometry cities that were actually built by the Shoggoth, conquering them. And of course, we mostly learn about them in the story Beyond the Mountains of Madness.
Yeah, there's not a terrible lot to say about them, except that, they kind of recontextualize the idea of what it is to be sapient in that universe, because they're not humanoid, but they're said to be intelligent. Like at one point, the guy telling the story says they were met in feeling sorry for what happened to them, despite the fact that they kind of deserved it for enslaving the Shoggoths, but whatever.
Absolutely. And that is such an interesting thing in Lovecraft, is discussing different types of creatures and how they are intelligent, were intelligent, and recontextualizing civilization. Just as a brief mention of the name of the story, The Nameless City, where a guy sees these pyramids that he thinks were built by humans and then finds out they were actually built by these evil lizard things, which also, by the way, is where we find the first mention of, we find the Necronomicon used and mentioned, and it is the first mention of that very famous line, "That is not dead which can eternal lie, for with strange eons even death may die." And it was actually about the mummified lizard things that built the pyramid, and which I'm calling them that because they have no other name. And that's actually a really great bonus one that we weren't planning on throwing into the Abyss, but is definitely in the Abyss because I don't think most people are familiar with that.
Oh yeah, absolutely. So we have a couple more here in the Abyss. Again, the Abyss is a big dark place, but there are things below that. So if you want to see the trench, let us know down in the comments. Next on the Abyss, speaking of lizard men, would be Yig from the Curse of Yig.
And Yig is interesting because Yig is kind of a serpent god. And Yig is, we do see, again, is one that we're going to see discussed in other media quite a bit, because I feel like a lot of people really do utilize it because Yig is a very easy god to fit into other media, because unlike a lot of Lovecraft's entities, which are very unknowable, they're based on the fear of alien entities, based on the fear of fecundity and fertility, based on the fear of the sea, based on the fear of an uncaring god. Yig is based on the fear of snakes. Snakes are scary. That's Yig's whole thing. And Yig is a serpent god. Yig has serpent man servants. It's served by great snakes. And it's the most interesting thing about it is In the world of Lovecraft, Native American deities like Quetzalcoatl exist, which, of course, Quetzalcoatl is often depicted as the feathered serpent, the flying serpent, which, interesting fact, a Quetzal is a type of bird, and coatl is the word for snake. So it literally is like saying peacock snake, because coatl is a specific kind of bird with bright plumage. So Quetzalcoatl exists, and they specifically, in the story about Yig, mention that basically the story of Quetzalcoatl was trying to sanitize the story of Yig, which is a much more malevolent and evil serpent god. So I think that that's kind of interesting that the real mythology is mentioned in this fictitious mythology as being a sanitation of this much scarier fictitious mythology, which I find cool.
And not to be this guy, wasn't Quetzalcoatl, wasn't he Aztec?
Yes. He was almost exclusively Aztec, although he may have been worshipped by other Mesoamerican religions. I'm unsure, but he's definitely predominantly Aztec.
We'll look into this and make a short on it later in the week or so. But anyway, yeah, Yig, snake god, and it's the most interesting thing, like you said, and I agree with this, is that it kind of takes an existing god and gives us, again, a dark mirror. This is the real version of it. The real version's a lot scarier. I love that. But moving on to, that was about all we had on the list, but I just realized there's one we need to mention. We'll call it a bonus entry because it's kind of funny and kind of silly. Are you familiar with the name Cthulhu?
And yes, Cthulhu is and if I want listener, I want you to just take a brief moment. And when I just said Cthulhu, I want you to think of what that is. I want you to imagine what that is. And if you just imagined that's literally Cthulhu's female sister, that you're right. That no matter how stupid you think that is correct. And I'm sorry, I get that was done for a reason. I get that it's been in some media that's maybe quite. I'm not necessarily criticizing the media it's from. Just as a general concept, I'm sorry, that's the silliest damn thing I've ever heard of.
Yeah, I think I don't remember if she's his sister or his daughter, but basically they just wanted to make Cthulhu in a dress, and that's what it is. Not literally in a dress, of course, but you see what I'm saying. Just a really goofy, crazy idea. What if Cthulhu was a girl? And there it is.
Well, and one of the reasons I find that so, because don't get me wrong, I mean, hey, another Lovecraftian entity. I don't necessarily have a problem with that on its face. My problem is it implies Cthulhu is a boy. That's what bothers me. Cthulhu does not have junk. Cthulhu is not a gendered entity. I'm sorry, Cthulhu's penis cannot exist. It would cause your mind to... Cthulhu. Let me rephrase that. Cthulhu's genitals cannot be contained by your concepts of gender. Cthulhu's genitals are beyond human understanding, thus you cannot gender Cthulhu.
Yeah, I don't really know what to say about the Cathinus, but...
well, it can't be described as one. That's the whole thing. It cannot be contained.
Well, but yeah, no, the idea, yeah, you're right. The idea of these things being gendered. Now, in the stories, I think they do refer to Cthulhu as he. They refer to Yog-Sothoth as he, but you got to understand, again, humans apply their own concepts, and I think Lovecraft knew this as he was writing it. They apply their own concepts to things they don't understand. So to humans, yeah, they might think, yeah, Cthulhu's a he, but it's really not. Cthulhu is something else entirely. It's something we wouldn't even begin to understand. Do great old ones have genders? Who knows? Let's ask them.
Or rather, let's not ask them. Our sanity couldn't handle it.
What's sanity? You still have sanity?
I've got like one sanity left. I'm saving that one for something important.
Oh, I'm well in the negatives at this point. But anyway, yeah, that's the Lovecraft bestiary Iceberg. And again, folks, tell us in the comments, do you want to see the trench? Because the trench would be the next level. And if you thought Cthulhu was weird, it gets weirder.
Yes, this gets infinitely weirder. And there is plenty. We actually even had stuff on our list that we went, nah, that's really deeper. That's the trench. So there is even less well-known stuff than this. So let us know if you want more detail. If there's any we missed, let us know if your favorite Lovecraft thing was not on this list.
But until the next episode, folks, I have been Hatter.
And I'm Gray, and thank you for joining us at Liminal Radio, the station between stations.